In this second commandment, then, we're thinking together of imaging the imaged. Can man make man in his image? Is a question which is in the public domain, especially after an event last week when robots ran in a half marathon in China. The engineers ran alongside of them and sought to refine their robots into runners who could complete the 13.1 miles. And it's pressing on our minds and society and time this question: can man make man in his image? Is man able to so engineer a being who can perform many of the actions, sometimes in a quicker, more accurate, more refined and better way than mankind can perform them, him or herself? Can man make man in his or her image? But the question we're thinking of this evening is a related question, but a different question. Can man make God in his image? Can man make an image of God? Can man form a likeness of God in the way that man perceives God to be? And this is the theme of this second command found in the verses we read in verses 4 to 6 of Exodus chapter 20. We recognize the progression within the commands, the first one focusing on the object of our worship, love, and service, our whole lives, our whole outlook. We are to have no other gods but the living and true God of the Bible and of the Lord Jesus Christ. We are to love him, we are to trust him, we are to follow him, we are to become like him. He is to be the object of our lives, of our worship, of our homage, of our obedience. But how are we to worship this sole object of our religion and devotion? How are we to serve him? How are we to respond to him? How are we to please him? This is what is being explored in this second command that we're thinking of this evening. It is important within the history of the Old Testament church, isn't it? Because of all the sins which they could have fallen into, and they did fall into, the dominant one which effected the dastardly punishment of the exile was idolatry. So while this sin in itself may be foreign to us in some ways, yet it was the one which captivated the minds and the hearts and the lives of God's people, surrounded, as we've been singing in our psalms, with idolatrous nations, with peoples who for a whole range of reasons had a whole panoply of idols whom they prayed to, whom they were devoted to, and whom they served. So within Scripture, this second command rises in its importance because of the history and the failure of the Old Testament church. An error which was repeated in the New Testament era by the Christian church from the 5th century onwards, who gave itself a return to the idolatry which marked the Old Testament church. We want to think of this tremendous, and I hope as we go through this command this evening and consider its demands on our life, and that's what we're focusing on, we want to see these 4 demands, and I trust we'll find that the richness, the joy, the wonder of this, the wisdom of this second commandment rising up within our lives and within our hearts. We want to know without dilution. We want to bow without distraction. We want to grow without denunciation. We want to show without duplication. Those 4 directives are found within this second commandment. They will enrich our lives, and they will make us worship our glorious God and the wisdom of his word in this second command. Let us think of knowing without dilution. Knowing without dilution. This second command, it forbids the worshipping of God with carved images or making any likeness of anything. The idea is of carving things out of stone or out of wood. The idea is comprehensive for us. It is emphasizing by the use of the 2 words, carved image or likeness, that this is a comprehensive command. By the use of the 3 levels of heaven above, earth beneath, water under the earth, it is emphasizing the comprehensive nature of what is being instructed here. We can't make images, nor can we make a likeness if we see any distinction between those. All bases are being covered in the usage of these 2 terms, image or likeness of God. All areas and spheres are being covered, heaven above, earth beneath, the waters under the earth. We can extract nothing from those 3 spheres and make something tangible to represent God. I remember as a teenager wrestling with this command and wondering, as I've discovered I'm not the only person in the world who has ever wondered this idea keeps emerging within the commentaries. Is it wrong to have the model of a dog on our mantelpiece? And it's not. The idea here is that we're making a tangible, visible representation of a deity which we will worship. It becomes an object of our devotion and our religion. That is what is being forbidden here. That we try to represent God by something visible and tangible, extracted from heaven above, from the sphere of earth beneath, from something out of the waters, a bird or an animal or a fish, is being used as a representation of God which we will be devoted towards and which we will seek to worship God through. And the reason for this is that we cannot properly represent God by carving an idol from wood or from stone. We will fall short of a proper representation of God in our attempt to represent God by anything from heaven, from earth, from the waters. By representing him from some creature from heaven, earth, or the waters, we will only be able to represent one aspect of our glorious God. And we will never be able to represent that aspect fully as we seek to worship him by an idol. The chief illustration of this is from the people of Israel making the golden calf. They had been influenced by the nation of Israel, who had animals and creatures to represent the deities which they worshipped. And that influence had seeped into the mind and heart of the Israelites. And so when Moses was up the mountain receiving this very commandment, they formed this golden calf, a mirror of the Apis bull, which was there in Egypt, which lived usually for 18 years, which was honored and buried with a great ceremony. So here was their Apis bull, this golden calf, this symbol of power and strength. You see, it's limiting God. It's a symbol of his power, but what about his love? What about his wisdom? What about his grace? The idol dilutes the great glory, the infinite nature of our glorious God. It brings him down to something minimal, something constricted, something limited. An owl might represent his wisdom, but only his wisdom. An eagle might represent his royalty, but only his royalty. A bull might represent his strength, but only his strength. And so this command is that we will know without dilution, that we will worship God and think of God not in a constricted way, not in a narrow way, not in a limited way, but in that wide way, in that full way, in that extensive way, in that great way in which he is and in which he exists. And we wrestle with that, don't we? We do wrestle with that because, like the idolaters, we pick and choose the attributes of God which we are comfortable with and which we are familiar with and which bring us help and direction and peace in our lives. And sometimes there is that strain of limiting God in our minds and prayers and outlook and heart. And we think of his grace and his mercy and his compassion, but we never think of his holiness or his wrath or his justice. And this command is saying to us, no, without dilution. Think of God in his fullness. Don't set any limits. Don't set any restrictions. Don't shave off any of his attributes. Think of him in the panoply, in the fullness, in the wide range of who he is and what he does. This very command presses us onto this, doesn't it? Because this very command speaks about his love in verse number 6, and we hold on to that. The steadfast love of God. What a thing that is for our life, for our family, for our children. That's what we want to the 1,000 generations. But it also speaks in verse number 5 of his jealousy. And this is what the command is about. That we don't pick and choose the attributes of God, but that we think of him in the broad range, in the fullness of his character, in the balance of his being, in the greatness and glory of who he is. To know without dilution. How to do it? It's challenging, but we need to find a way. We begin, if we model our praying on the Lord's Prayer, hallowed be your name. We begin our prayers. We include an element of worship in our private and public prayers. And perhaps this is a way in which we can fulfill this command is by focusing on an aspect of God in each of our prayers and adoration, including those ones that we find more difficult to worship God for. To know God without dilution. So secondly, let's think about bowing before God without distraction. This is a second reason not to have idols, is because it takes us away from the spiritual being of God, and it distracts us with something visible and tangible. And within this tremendous commandment, this rich commandment, this idea of sequence, of what Parker calls digression, it is spelled out for us, isn't it? You shall not make. You shall not bow down. You shall not serve them. There is that digression. There is that downward path. There is that increased velocity away from the living and true God. We begin by making the idol. And then we're bound down to the idol. And then we're serving the idol. We're being sucked in. We're being drawn away further and further from the living and the true God. What at first might seem innocent and pedantry and simple and shallow, making an idol, what harm can that do? God is saying it's going to lead you to worshipping that idol, and it's going to lead you to serving that idol. But we're to bow before God without distraction, without something that we see in our peripheral vision, without something that's going to distract us, that we behold out of the corner of our eye. There's to be nothing tangible, nothing visible, nothing that's going to take our mind, our eye off the glory, the spirituality, the majesty of our God. We're to bow down and worship in prayer in public and private without distraction. There's that wonderful passage in chapter 34 of Exodus where God, and this longings within every believer, where Moses says to God, "Show me your glory, I want to see you." God says to Moses, "You can't see me. You can't see me." Because we're to worship without distraction. We're to think of his omnipresence. We're to think of his purity, his simplicity, as the supreme spirit filling heaven and earth, his immanence, his transcendence. All of this is destroyed and minimized. Our minds are distracted if we have an object to worship. In the 5th century, the Christian church took over many of the pagan temples as the Roman Empire disintegrated. And rather than sweeping those pagan temples from all the idols that were in them to Zeus and the other Roman gods, the Christian church Christianized those idols. And they changed the names of them. And they began to use them, and they argued that the level of education and literacy in the Middle Ages was minimal, and that these idols and stained glass and other objects within those temples would help the people understand the message of the gospel and the truths of God. They made a distinction between worshipping and venerating. They argued that worshipping was bad, venerating the images and the idols was good, because these images and idols and stained glass and other accoutrements that they brought into the places of worship helped the unlearned learn the gospel. But this digression, indicated in the second command, became the reality for them. The reformers assessed the argument about the images helping the people to understand the gospel by replying, "Don't listen to what they say about the images. Watch what they do. How do they treat them? They kiss them. They bow before them. They revere them." Whatever they might say about the distinction between bowing before and venerating, the reality in their lives is they worship those idols. Those idols are not a tool, an aid, and help to worship the living God. They worship those objects of wood and stone. We're to bow without distraction. The reformers made a challenging assessment and rule for all preachers, which I probably don't live up to. That they replied to the arguments of the church at that time, for including the stained glass and the images within church buildings, as educators of the poorer and the less educated. They said, well, the preacher should turn the ears of the congregation into eyes. You don't need those images and visible signs all around you as you come into the presence of God. Such should be the ability of the preacher to, in a gripping way, present verbally the glories and pictures and wonders and simplicity of the gospel. Our church tries to do this, doesn't it? There's not a lot of show here, is there? There's not a lot to distract the mind here with our pews and with our white walls and basic building. And what an aid this is to us, isn't it? To bow without distraction. To come into this building here, to meet with God, to focus on Him, to think of Him, to pray to Him, to hear Him speak. This is what lies behind this command, that there'll be nothing to take our minds away from the glorious God. But while there might not be a distraction outside of us in this room, we know that there's many distractions inside of us. Calvin described our hearts as a factory of idols, that it's constantly manufacturing idols, more idols, new idols, different idols, bigger idols. And it's drawing us constantly away from worshiping God and delighting in God. And we're thinking about our bills to pay this week and the appointment that we have this week and the responsibilities that are burdening us down. There's so many things going on in our minds. Spurgeon has this great defense of using illustrations in his book on preaching. And he says you need to grip the attention of the congregation and use illustrations to do that, because people's minds are all over the place. People are seeing the new dress of a fellow worshipper, and that lady's thinking about buying that in the sale next week. A man there is thinking about a colleague whom he has to pay for the work that has been done in his factory, and he needs to take a mental note of doing that. And as we're sitting with God's people in a basic building, there are these distractions, not externally, but internally in our hearts. And after a long list, Spurgeon asks his students, how do you know that happens? And his response was, because it happens to me when I sit in the public worship of God. And what a challenge for us who pride ourselves in our simplicity of our building, that this command is reaching in to the cogitations of our hearts and our minds, that we're to bow without distraction. And thirdly, we're to grow without denunciation. We're to grow without denunciation. This is bringing us to the end of our command and thinking of the future and the growth of our families and generations and congregations into the future. And God is speaking about this. And He's steering us here. He's guiding us here. He's saying, if you love me, that is, if you do not make these idols, if you give me the glory and the honor and the praise that is due to my name, then I will visit you with my blessing, with my grace, with my favor. My steadfast love will be to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. There will be no generation, however far into the distance, who seeks to avoid the manufacturing of idols and worship me in spirit and in truth, the living, invisible, spiritual God, whom I will not bless, whom I will not favor, whom I will tire to delight in. There will be my steadfast love for generations, 1,000 generations down the line. I will never tire of blessing a people who worship me in spirit and in truth. But on the other hand, those who hate me, those who minimize me, those who make idols, those who dilute my glory, those who think that I'm contained within this block of stone or of wood, those who hate me so much that they make a representation with their own imaginations and creativity, that they are so bombastic and proud to think that they can identify what I am like and who I am. Well, I will judge them and bring them down to the third and fourth generation. This part of the commandment has raised eyebrows and heckles. Is this casting a shadow over God's glorious character here, the wording here, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation? The reply is obvious in the text, isn't it? The difficulty is that in Ezekiel chapter 18, God says that he will not punish the children for the sins of their fathers. When the whole concept is brought up in John chapter 9, who did sin, this man or his parents? Jesus bats it aside and says that's not how God works. The key phrase is in the 3 words at the end of verse 5. 4 words, those who hate me. So it's not just the fathers who are idolaters, who are bound down to images, but the third and the fourth generation, they also themselves hate the Lord by being idolaters and bowing down to those images. So it's not that the father is an idolater and 4 generations after him, that generation is still being punished because of their great-great-great-grandfather's mistakes. But rather, that 4th generation has followed the bad example of their great-great-great-grandfather, and they themselves are idolaters. And that's the challenge, isn't it? That's the rub for us. That our bad example could be passed on to our children and our children's children and our great-great-grandchildren. That if we do not reverence our God, if we do not delight in the worship of God, and all heads of families here are being affected by this, aren't we? We're being challenged by this. How do we in our homes convey to our children the delight, the importance, the joy of family worship as we open the Bible, as we pray to them? Do we do it with joy, with wisdom, with regularity, with delight? Will they grow up to be men and women who love to be in church, who love to open the Bibles and meet with God? Or will they be a generation who have been turned off church and turned off family worship because their dad, their granddad found it boring, a chore, an imposition on their week and on their day? Growing without denunciation. Or families, or subsequent generations, living not under the jealous anger of God, but under the blessing and love and encouragement of God. And lastly, show without duplication, show without duplication. And this is bringing us into a tremendous and a big picture understanding of this command. What has God got in mind in this second command? Why is this so important? And Kevin DeYoung, in his really useful book on the Ten Commandments, he has this statement that failure to keep the second commandment, or idolatry, not only diminishes God, but diminishes us. It's a robber, it's a thief to our role in this world, to our position. Because you and I, man and woman, young and old, are the image of God in this world. Not only does idolatry diminish God, idolatry diminishes us. And you see how in this text this point is being made. See the two terms that we highlighted in our first point in verse number 4. Image and likeness. Are they not tautologous? Are they not synonymous? Maybe they are. But the significance here is that they were used before in the first chapter of Genesis when God said, "Let us make man and woman in our image, after our likeness." This is our role. This is our God-given privilege and position in this world. And so this command is not only concerned about God's position and honor and glory, it's also concerned about the God-given role he's given to us. We're to show God to all creation. We're his likeness. It's our position, our role. But more importantly, we have failed in this, haven't we? We don't get out to the peripheral likeness and image of God, do we? We're always falling short. We're always coming up early. We're always never making it. We've failed in our God-given role of being the image and likeness of God, and we fail every day. And so this command is not only concerned about our role, but it's supremely concerned about Christ's role. Colossians 1, he's the image of the invisible God. He said to his disciples, you remember, he who has seen me has seen the Father. John 1:18, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, he has made him known. And just think of this command. Think of this command given at Mount Sinai. You shall not make any image or any likeness of God. Think about how it anticipates the coming of Christ, the role of Christ, and every image or likeness made in the world was eating into that supreme dignity that was to be reserved for Jesus Christ. Every idol was stealing a bit of his thunder. He was to emerge from heaven, and all eyes were to be fastened on the image and glory of Christ. But in many lands, attention was diverted from that glorious one to come to these poor, false substitutes of idolatry and idols. We're to show without duplication, because we are the image and the likeness of God. And Jesus Christ is that full and perfect likeness of God. Did you see Victoria Beckham strutting out there in her white suit, trouser suit? But there was a reason for it, wasn't there? She's not getting on with her son's girlfriend who wore recently, and it was widely published, the very same white trouser suit. She was making this point, you see. And this likeness, this image of her son's girlfriend, it was not complimentary, but it was antagonistic. But we're being called to be the image of God, the likeness of God. To not dilute his name, to not be distracted to other false representations of him, but to assimilate his character in our words that are kind, that are forgiving, that are gentle, in our thoughts that are pure and controlled, in our tempers that are managed and stable and measured. What a call this evening for us to step up to the plate, for us to fulfill our calling. We can denounce idolatry in every nation under the heavens, but what about us fulfilling the role that God has given to us in union with his Son, Jesus Christ? So, know without dilution, bow without distraction, grow without denunciation, show without duplication. Imaging. The imaged. That's the basis of this command, isn't it? That you shouldn't be making images of God because he's already imaged. He's imaged in man and woman whom he has made in his image and likeness. He's imaged in his Son, Jesus Christ, whom he has sent from heaven. Civil servants around London are being warned about where they go and where they sit and what they say. That there are convictions that various nations throughout the earth are setting listening devices under benches, in rooms, onto trees, to listen in to the top civil servants who go out for a breath of fresh air at lunchtime and talk among themselves about top-level business. And the nations of the earth, they want to know it. What's going on at the highest level. They want to study it. They want to assimilate it. They want to understand it and use it. And what a rebuke to us in our search for knowing the Lord. To be so taken up and captivated and addicted to knowing his glory, to seeing his expansiveness, to recognizing the depths of his being, and then avoiding dilution and distraction, and desiring that we in some increasing way will mirror him and reflect him.